Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms where I give you a heads up about upcoming shows and which date and time they will be aired. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the shows, MP3 files which you can download, or links to your favorite platform like iTunes, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and all other major sources. You can find information for upcoming and past talk show appearances as well as new book projects at MarlenePardo.com. You can also purchase books and merchandise there. And you can visit my author page on Amazon at Marilynn Pardo Pellicer. Due to popular demand, I'm narrating my True Believer stories that I've collected throughout the years in a new series called Supernatural Storytime. You can find links at supernaturalstorytime.com. If you are into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate some of those at Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If you would like to read noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I do want to thank you all for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marley with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? Good? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. As you guys know, everybody's always asking me about this. Yeah, we're like definitely in the rainy season down here in South Florida, so I'm getting lots of rain. The trees are growing great, but man, I've got everything, weeds, you name it, growing with it. Because I'm not using any herbicides, but if anybody's got suggestions, because I'm doing a thing of like vinegar and somebody saying salt, and it's like because it's like you put stuff out there and it gets washed away and you walk out there and it's kind of toppling it. So anyway, yes, let me have my wimpy rant now that it's over. Anyway, guys, let me tell you about our guest today. This is a lady who is to say she's an author, so that's an understatement. Her name is Marilynn Hughes, and she founded the Out of Body Travel Foundation back in 2003. She's written over 98 books, 40 magazines, and around 15 CDs on out-of-body travel and comparative religious mysticism. These books, along with the music, are all available for free to download. By the way, and we'll mention it again towards the end, but her website is outofbodytravel.org. That's outofbodytravel.org. But anyway, she has experienced research, written, and taught about out-of-body travel and mysticism since 1987. She's appeared on innumerable radio and television programs to discuss her out-of-body experiences. Now, she's also studied the ancient sacred text of all major and minor world religions, Catholic mysticals, aesthetic, biblical, doctrinal, dogmatic, systematic, everything. She's beyond well-rounded. She's also has studied as a remote viewer with Joseph McGonigal, who trained her, and he's an operational remote viewer. And she's also has a certificate in naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and Reiki. She has an honorary doctorate in divinity and metaphysics, certification as a chaplain, spiritual counselor, and interfaith ministry. So, how are you doing today? How are you? And by the way, guys, I left some stuff out there because of not. But yes, that's just the best part. But believe me, there's a lot more. But anyway, go ahead. How are you doing today, Marilynn?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, and I'm going to ask you because and believe me, I'm wondering, how did you get interested in this? Was it childhood experience, something that profoundly affected you when you were very young, or was it something that you grew into as an adult?
A little bit of both, I'd say. When I was 9, I had a profound out-of-body experience where I was kind of shown. Okay. the clouds parted. I've talked about this a lot in other interviews, but the clouds parted. There was this marble staircase up towards the heavens, and the angels were lining the staircase, and I was,
Wow.
Sent up the stairs, and there were two thrones at the top, and two beings that I perceived as personifications of God the Father and God the Son. And I was given a little bit of a visual tour through what would be like the remainder of my childhood. I was shown some of the things that would be difficult that I would have to overcome and get through. And I was also informed that there was going to come a time in my adulthood where this experience was going to return to me, and that there was something that I needed to do, destined to do, so to speak. And so it was around the time that I was around 22 that I started having these experiences again spontaneously. And I started journaling about them, and, the rest is history. I'm 54 now, so it's been going on for a good 30-some years, and boy, it's gone a lot deeper and a lot farther than I could have ever imagined, in terms of the depths of the knowledge and the wisdom that's available to us through these experiences, and what we can learn about not only our own souls, but the spirit world. Ironically, what's happening when we're dealing with ghosts, when we're dealing with hauntings, things like that you talk about a lot on your show, but also how to help, how to deal with those things. Yes. Also, as well, a lot of my books deal with the purification process that we all need to consider undergoing during our lives, so that we can utilize this time as well as possible for the purpose that we were brought here for. So a lot of what I was instructed in, and have continued to be instructed in, is the importance of the use of our time here for the purification journey. Because and a lot of people find this, it seems like too simple a message, I think. Yeah. But in reality, we get so caught up in so many worldly things, and we forget that there is a very specific set of instructions that we incarnate with. And oftentimes we can get distracted to the point that those instructions can be completely forgotten or just kind of put to the wayside. And I do think a big part of the purpose of my work and my writings is to help people to refocus on that, so that we don't waste time. We don't waste our incarnations here.
Yes. Let me ask you, when you said 9 years old, that's very young. Did something happen in your life? Was it sickness? Because I know illness sometimes will trigger it. Or did it just happen?
When I was young, it just happened.
Okay.
It was interesting, because I was raised in a Mormon household, but it was not a devout household, and basically primarily, most of the members of my family were really more atheists. It was primarily my father who was Mormon, but it was, again, not a devout household, and he wasn't real devout or anything.
Okay.
But I had a real strong. What was different in my situation was that I just, from the time I was young, had a really strong awareness of Jesus Christ. Okay. I knew, and so I was always praying, and I was always, studying the New Testament and stuff like that. And I think that, that helped me to be receptive to see that vision. And then, later in life, when it first came back at the age of 22, again, it was more spontaneous. But around the age of 36, I did have a major illness that occurred that should have been terminal, but ended up, obviously being
not terminal.
Not terminal, exactly. Yeah. And
right.
so that also I believe also impacted the journey as well, because as you go into a space where the illness takes you to what I kind of call the borderlands of existence, which is where you live in both worlds a lot more, especially when you're at your sickest. And the veil lightens quite a bit. So it's even easier sometimes, I think, to travel out of body and have more of the deeper spiritual experiences. So I think that, in my early 20s, I began this search because I wanted to know the truth, no matter what that might be, whether it was what I already believed or what I didn't know. And obviously there's a lot that I've learned that none of which I knew. And
well, you know what? There's not. I mean, because let's face it, everybody knows you're going to die. But everybody's always thinking, I will die when I'm an old person. Right. But there's nothing like facing your own mortality, I think, when you're younger, when you're thinking, I'm supposed to be around for a lot longer, like you said, that kind of like makes you go into this mindset and spiritual awakening that you think, well, what a shame that you have to wait till maybe you're faced with, I'm not going to maybe die when I'm 85.
Right. Yeah. But, that is so true, because we do, and that is one of the ways that we waste a lot of time, because we don't realize. But it's a twofold process, I think. There is just that mental aspect of it, but there's also a physical aspect when your body is shutting down that kind of lifts the veil a bit. You really do have a little bit more of living between worlds. Yes. And it makes that kind of experience much more likely, much more frequent and stuff like that. And so during those periods, I think that it kind of heightens that for a lot of us.
Right. And you hear a lot from medical personnel that, like hospice nurses and, oncology units that, when you have a lot of people, like you said, that are in that, they see and they address spiritual beings that, as a matter of fact, one time I spoke to one of my guests. She was a hospice nurse, and she says, sometimes I treat these people for quite a while, but she says, but once I hear them talk to or about somebody I know that's deceased, I know that their days, that they're going to be dying soon. She goes, that's how I know. Even though their health or their symptoms might be very stable or not change, she goes, that's one of my first indicators that something is happening with them. So like you said, it thins out, the veil thins out, and your perception, I guess, becomes more acute.
Yes. And, that's true in the fact that, and there were periods during my own illness where a lot of my deceased relatives and friends moved closer to me. So they were closer because there were periods of peril where I could have crossed, and so they move in closer.
Let me ask you something, Marilynn. When you had that dream that you said you were seeing all these things that you were going to have to go through, did you get an inkling of that health crisis that you experienced back then? Did they share that to you?
I was not shown at all. It was mostly about the trials and the difficulties I would face during the childhood in order to get to adulthood.
Okay, I see. Okay.
And it was all accurate. It was helpful because it gave me a sense of the way to deal with it ahead of time.
Sure.
And what was interesting about it at the age of 9, and this is it was one of those experiences where, it was kind of like Jacob with the ladder, where it was an out of body experience, fully conscious. I mean, it was not like a dream at all.
Okay.
It was, but at the same time, it could be, you could call it whatever you call it, but it was one of those things where it was, literally the heavens just descended for that period of time, and there was no denying it. You can't, you know what I mean? It's interesting. A lot of people ask me, well, how do you know if you're having an out-of-body experience or not? The reality is, a lot of people have, because a lot of people know now that people have out-of-body experiences in their sleep. A lot of people experience different levels of consciousness of those experiences. And some of that is remembered in various levels of the dream state, you know. But when someone has a fully conscious out-of-body experience, it's so mind-blowing and mind-bending, and it's so fully conscious. You feel more awake and present than you do in your waking life. You don't have to ask the question. It's not
right,
like,
exactly. It's not that was it a dream or well man it didn't, right? And I understand there's absolutely no question.
It's a completely and that's the thing I think that a lot of people would benefit from hearing is when you have it fully conscious, you're not going to need to ask. You're going to go through the whole process of the vibrational state. You're going to hear the roaring sounds of the astral plane. Mm-hmm. You're going to go through the separation process, and you are going to experience being in your spirit, separate from your body, fully conscious of it, and it's going to be a no question event. It's like, whoa, this is for real, you know?
Yes.
One of the things, though, that a lot of people, I think, would also benefit from knowing is that basic construct of an out-of-body experience of, okay, so we separate from our body is literally the basic experience. There is so much more to out-of-body experiences and out-of-body travel to be had because it involves the ability to travel. It takes time and effort and prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, and all these things, but there is, a multidimensional universe that you then begin to travel. So you're going to be moving through, infinite numbers of realms, which include heavens, purgatories, and hells.
Right.
And so this, this just separating and seeing your body separate in your spirit form is literally, it's just like walking out your front door. That's just your basic beginning experience, and literally, it's kind of like what St. Paul said: "Eye has not seen nor ear heard what God has prepared." The things that are available through the out-of-body travel experience are so far beyond that, and that's partly what people will benefit from, in reading some of these books, because they start realizing what. This educational process that our guardian angels and our spiritual guardians take us through in the spirit world, and how God can educate us and purify us and actually raise our vibrations and bring our education higher and reveal to us these important issues of our own personal soul, our reincarnational issues as to what it is that we're here to achieve or overcome in this lifetime. And then, we're also taken into, realms of service where we are being taught how to assist with other things of the spiritual world, which has to do with, the nature of ghosts, lost souls, spiritual warfare, angels and demons. And you're going to be dealing with souls who are doing times in, innumerable purgatories and even hell realms. And we are also then given instruction and given vibrational raisings to help us to uplift and do greater things and become greater in our understanding and knowledge, as well to go to higher spheres ourselves. Through the aid of, the spiritual hierarchies that are sent to assist us. So it truly is an infinite universe that you are tapping into. And literally, the first out-of-body experience, that's just literally the beginning.
And you know what? You said something really interesting, Marilynn, when you mentioned purgatory. Because not everybody, depending also on what their religious beliefs are or their knowledge, everybody thinks either you go to heaven or you go to hell. This is that either or the, and a lot of people don't realize that there is the purgatory, the state of purgatory, which is kind of like your last chance to not have to go to, in other words, redeem yourself. In other words, now let me ask you: do you think that ghosts, and by this I mean intelligent, is that a form of purgatory for those souls caught there, or no?
Some of them. Now, what I have seen is what we have when you're dealing with a lot of ghosts. You have a variety of spirits.
Right.
You have lost souls, which are souls that are lost. A lot of times, sudden death or traumatic death. Sometimes people who didn't have or didn't put any effort into any spiritual achievement in life, so they literally are unable to raise their vibration enough to even see beyond a third dimensional construct, so they get lost.
Right.
When they cross over, death comes suddenly. You see this with car accidents, airplane crashes, any kind of disaster, any kind of natural disaster, any kind of even criminal events. Some of these shootings that we see. I deal with souls who are taken very much by surprise by these and have to go through processes. So we assist them in adjusting to their new status and that kind of thing. So we have lost souls. Then we have wandering spirits. And this is kind of what you're referring to, which are usually purgatorial souls who have been given time where they have to wander in certain areas of the earth to do some kind of time. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this.
Okay.
One time I was in a hotel room, ironically a Motel 6, and I was greeted during the night by us. It was in a city, and I used to live out in the mountains, so whenever I would go to the city, I'd often pick up a lot of souls. I live in a small town now, outside of a city now. I still do the same thing, but it's just I don't live in the mountains anymore. But so I had gone to this Motel 6, and a group of about 20 or 30 spirits came to me at the foot of my bed and explained to me, they asked me to pray for them. They were purgatorial spirits, wandering spirits, and they were sent to wander the third and the fourth realm for a period of time, and it was for the purpose of during their lives they had ignored the needs of others, and so they were going to experience being ignored and having people not being able to hear them or see them or being uncared for. And this was their purgatory. So a lot of times when we see ghosts, one of the things that's real important for your listeners, like, what should I do? What should I do? First thing you start doing is you pray for them. You start praying for them. And there are a lot of things. I have a lot of resources at my website for praying for the departed. Yes. So you can even get that at my website if you want to know what kinds of prayers and things like this. We can offer all sorts of prayers for them, but start praying for them. But there's also a lot of guidance in my books on how do you actually specifically help these souls. Lost souls are going to be different because you're going to actually direct them. You're going to re-change their energy just a little bit, because you're going to try to shift them to the point where they're able to bring their vibration up enough so that they can now see the light, see the guardian angels, and then they can take it from there. And so that happens in a myriad of ways. And I have some books in a series called the Mystic Knowledge series. And of course, all my books are available for free download at the site at outofbodytravel.org. And you can download a book called Ghosts and Lost Souls, which gives you a ton of detail and a ton of different scenarios with ghosts and lost souls. There's also Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons, which goes into this other aspect of it, which is, so we have the lost souls, we have wandering spirits, and we also have dark souls and evil spirits. Yes. So, in terms of the hauntings, you're going to have a range within all of those levels. When you're dealing with evil spirits or dark spirits, it's going to be totally different than a lost soul or a wandering spirit, because these are situations that require spiritual warfare. They're often souls that have to be what I call dismantled, and they are sent to the lower spheres to be dealt with there. And unfortunately, it sounds harsh, but as you read those books about it, you understand better why that must be. We go where we're compatible.
Yes.
So if you're an evil spirit, you're going to go where you're compatible, because there are energetic laws that keep things in balance. And actually, I have a great story about an evil spirit like this that is very interesting, that I think shows this. Because when I first started learning about this, I had trouble understanding that sometimes we had to dismantle a soul and allow it to be literally sent below.
Okay.
There was a case when I was living up in the mountains. We had a case of a missing gentleman who was apparently involved in some dark activity, satanic type things. He was missing, and he was missing for several months, and he started coming to me, and he was showing me things, but he was profoundly evil, and he was extremely dangerous.
Okay.
And this was considered totally a violation of eternal law, because I was trying to help him and he was trying to hurt me for helping him. So,
right.
And so, to make a long story short, he kept showing me, he would keep attacking me. He would try to, and that was his purpose, because he had become an evil spirit, because he was evil. So when you're dealing, like, for instance, with someone who's crossed over, who's truly evil, they do become evil spirits, and you can't help that. A lost soul, on the other hand, is just lost, and you're going to help, and they're going to go to the light, and that's your usual situation with most hauntings. But you do have, in these places that have the unusual hauntings that people really have a hard time getting rid of, it's usually an evil spirit or a dark spirit that's just really difficult to disengage. But anyway, he was showing me, kept showing me an upside down owl and a pile of bones.
Okay.
And so I called the sheriff and just shared that with him, because, I'd done some of these things before. And then I kind of ignored it, and I prayed a lot, because this was a really, really dangerous soul. And this was probably the first time that I dealt with someone who was literally dangerous to me.
Okay.
Most of the lost souls I had worked with were, I dealt with a lot of souls who had done some very bad things before their deaths, but they were not evil,
Okay.
They were lost. It was different. So, that's where you go into the energetic truth of things. But anyway, about a month later, I got a call from the sheriff, and he said, I was just wondering if you'd come into my office. I want to show you something. And so I came into his office, and he just threw a picture down on the counter. It was a picture of an owl hanging upside down over a pile of bones. And it turned out they found him, and that was what the satanic cult did to him.
Oh.
And so he was showing me where, he had been, ritually murdered.
Okay.
But it was bizarre. It was very bizarre, because he had kind of agreed to it.
Well, and that was my question. Did they kind of turn on him, or did he volunteer himself?
It sounded like what the sheriff was explaining to me was that there was some kind of, like, suicidal agreement that he was sacrificing.
Oh, okay.
Satan. So it was really bizarre. But then what came to pass after this, they found him, and they found there was actually a woman who was primarily responsible, and she had actually, she had, stuff in her freezer. She was doing some really bad things.
Okay.
And so she got prosecuted, and I took care of all that. But then, spiritually, it was just very interesting, because he had somehow agreed to this. And he had kind of even told me that in the experiences I was having, and this was part of the reason he was attacking me. And he was upset because he was sacrificing himself to Satan, but yet he wasn't getting what he wanted. It was
well, I was going to ask you, what was he attempting to do? Was he attempting to take you over, to possess you, or what was his purpose in, or coming to you because you were actually able to communicate with him?
I think that he wanted to. There was a combination. He would have enjoyed possessing me, and I think he did try to do that. He also wanted to destroy me because that's what evil wants to do with the light, as a general rule. Yes. And so I had this subsequent then mystical experience, an out-of-body experience. It was very profound, where I went through a purification ritual, and Jesus was there, and he took me to this Council of 12, and it was regarding his soul. And Jesus took me in there. He was totally quiet. There's these other, Jesus wearing a white robe. The Council of Old Men they were all wearing a white robe, and they were going to pronounce judgment on this soul. And despite how evil he was, I was still, hoping that there was some way to help him. Okay. And they pronounced the second death on his soul. And that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. Okay. And Jesus took me out of the building, and I looked at him, and I was about to say something because, I was like, well, what? There should be something we can do. Right. And he just looked at me, and he said, it is not for you to understand. It is just for you to know. And then I was going to say something again, and he just repeated, it is not for you to understand. It is just for you to know. And so I knew that the second death had been pronounced upon him, but I did not know yet, what was that second death? What does that really mean, for a soul like in that circumstance? But what's interesting, you have a situation like this where the consequences are so serious, and of course I don't know anything about what his life was like, and all these things. Mm-hmm. And then you have other situations, like for instance, I worked in a home that had terrible hauntings going on, really, really serious hauntings. But it turned out to be, I'm sure you've heard of these kinds of situations before, where sometimes a spirit stays there and it starts drawing other spirits to it. And then over time groups form, and then the energy of that can appear to be more sinister than it actually is, just because there's this group mentality. Sometimes you have, like, some of the lost souls will be doing things that are almost like tricksters. Mm-hmm. You get into, like, even poltergeist type activity. A lot of times when you're dealing with poltergeists, you really have to discern whether there's evil involved. But sometimes it's something like this. So this was a huge group. It was like 60 or 70 souls had eventually congregated in this home. And they were afraid to move forward, and what they had done was they had created, and in fact, in this home, you had a haunting, and you also had a young woman who was experiencing signs of psychosis and possible possession. But in this case, and she had been going into the hospital in psychotic episodes. They'd been putting her on antipsychotic medication. It was a really bad situation. And when I went in the out-of-body travel state, the first time I went in, I was introduced to all these souls, and I saw, we've got a mess here, but it looks like it might be something we might be able to do something about. And then I was taken back in, like, about a week later, and we started moving the souls out, and it was the most beautiful thing, because a lot of times what you'll do is you will seed some type of information the first time you go in. So we're letting them know, so you guys are dead. A lot of times lost souls haven't figured that out yet.
I know, and you would think, let's state the obvious. And people think, like, really? Yeah? Tell them they're dead.
That's why everyone's been ignoring
Exactly.
me. Right? And so you state the obvious, and then you start there, and then it's like, okay, so we have to get your vibrations lifted. You're kind of attached to the earth, and then you have different reasons for different souls. And a lot of people are attached to the earth for various reasons. These people were congregating to one another because they were kind of tricksters. They were doing things they shouldn't have been doing. But they were congregating and creating like this. It was a way for them not to progress. It was a way for them to create like a vacuum of energy. And so I spoke to them about the importance of their journey. I spoke to them about the importance of Jesus Christ. I spoke to them about the importance of how all of them as a group needed to realize that they were just sitting there wasting time, and they were actually violating eternal law because they were hurting this young woman, and they were creating all this havoc in this home, and they did not have dominion to do that. One of the things we have to remember is whenever there's a haunting, we're dealing with issues of dominion. Those who are haunting don't have dominion, and this is where we have the eternal law to claim with them in terms of they can't stay. They don't have the right to stay. And a lot of people too will say, oh, but it's a friendly ghost, it's no big deal.
Boy.
And it's like, well, that may be true. You may have a friendly ghost, but at the same time, there are some ghosts that are friendly, but at the same time, it's not good for them to stay. They need to go because they have to progress, and they're wasting time. And so when I returned, it was just beautiful because there were like 60 or 70 souls. And so it was like this beautiful funnel through the black night of the sky. It was lined with these huge, they were, I would say, like 20 feet high angels, with the big white wings. And they lined this funnel. And with each soul, they came through in a line, and I prepared them as we shot them up, and they were all liberated and set free. And this young woman who had been on antipsychotic drugs for years, what happened with her? She got off the drugs immediately. Great. She was completely disabled by this. She began working within the next 6 months, and her life was normal within a year. There were no more signs of the haunting. And after we got all the souls out, there's a process in the out-of-body travel state that you also do, which was that we sealed that house off from the spirit realm. We sealed it with the sign of the cross, with a series of prayers that were necessary. And I also spoke to the young woman. Was necessary in her case because she had this natural gift, which in her case could lead her in a bad direction. Sure. That she really needed to stay away from this sort of thing. She had to, some people can work with the spirits and some people can't.
No.
Yeah, and she was
there for some reason. There's something in their psyche or their soul that they have this vulnerability that they can never, no matter, I mean, not to disregard protection, but it would be very dangerous for them to engage or be around that type of activity.
Exactly. Yes. And so it's real important that when something like that is occurring to someone, that you can almost always determine that if someone is having that kind of a response, they're not probably a person who should be doing that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's probably a natural gift to them, and they have to put a lot of things in place to protect themselves even more because of that.
Let me ask you something. I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I want to. That original guy, the one that you told me that it turned out that he offered himself as that he had been when he was alive, he was a horrible guy and pretty evil. Satanic worship, and then he goes off and he volunteers to get killed. Do you think at any point that he had, and by this I don't want to excuse his, whatever he did when he was alive. Do you think at any point he had any type of non-human entity that attached to him, or that he, what they call a perfect possession, allowed himself to be taken over by something that was extremely dark? Do you think that's possible?
You know, it's interesting because in his case, it reminded me much more of like what Emanuel Swedenborg spoke about.
Yes.
When he talks about how people, when they cross over, become angels or demons. Mm-hmm. He became like a demon. He just became that. And, you know, I don't know what kind of life he lived because I didn't know much about him. But I knew that he was satanic. I don't know what he did.
Based on that, you know that without knowing the details, probably it wasn't good.
You can just make some assumptions, but you don't know exactly. But it's interesting, too, because I've recently dealt with another case that involved a person who had satanic leanings who had died. And I was approached by some people about this, and it was interesting because people are so shocked because they are so shocked when they find out that because they think that doesn't matter, and I'm not sure why. Because this person, just like this one from many, many years ago, became an evil spirit, very demonic, very dangerous spirit, and a person who has a family, children, and according to the people that knew this person, was a good person. And I said, well, you cannot ignore the fact that this is what this person was doing. And it's, when you're dealing with the out-of-body travel state, you're taken into the teaching of energetic truth, which is you are taught how to mystically identify what something is, regardless of how it appears under the mask of human flesh. You know what I mean? Right. And so even in this case that I just shared with you, you have the appearance of something that could have appeared to be quite demonic. It was more of just a bunch of lost souls, and then in this other case, you're shown, in an interior way, what the energetic truth is behind all interactions. So in the out-of-body travel state, these things are taught to you, where God informs you energetically. It's infused into you. So you're taken into a situation, and you might see what it looks like on the ground, and then how God views it.
So let me ask you something. This person that you're talking about, it was discovered after the person's death that he was into, or she was into satanic things, but the family or nobody was aware of it. Is that what happened? That they were.
From what I understand, I think they might have been aware of it, but they just didn't think it was that big of a deal because, and I guess and this. I guess people who practice certain things, can also come across as just very good people, but
deception is part of that whole belief system. So
for people listening, I want to point out to you, you cannot make a deal with the dark side and expect it to have no consequences. It has terrible consequences. It's really a very serious thing. And but in our current society, I think that a lot of these things have been minimized as to their true import. When you go into the out-of-body travel state, you find out, what is holy, what is evil, and what is everything in between. And that's very, very important because, these are the mortal realms where we learn about good and evil within ourselves and all around us. And part of this whole thing that we go back to, which is, wasting our time here, is that if we do not learn those things, we're kind of wasting time, because there are aspects of ourselves that reside in darkness that we don't recognize. And we can only recognize if we are receptive to have it being pointed out to us either by others or by God.
Right.
And God, through, certain these out-of-body experiences, he provides us with this way of seeing ourselves, truly, and it really heightens and accelerates our path, because by being able to recognize these things that we need to do, whether it's those issues, vices, whatever within our lives, or recurring habitual patterns that have come throughout past lives.
Right.
And we recognize those things, we have the power to alter them, and thus actually move towards stopping the pattern and reaching what I speak about in my books as the ascension from this realm, which is graduating, getting to the next point rather than circling and doing it over and over and over again. And what we see, and we talked about the purgatorial realms. Purgatorial realms mean purification. Purgation means purging ourselves, purification of those things that no longer serve our path.
Right.
The reason we look at it as purging or purgation is because when you look at an all-holy God, and we're somewhere along this spectrum between an all-holy God and darkness, we have to recognize what that holiness is in order to be able to continue to approach it. In order to come closer to God, you have to understand what that means. And that's what these out-of-body experiences tend to produce in us. I've had so many beautiful experiences where I have been given this insight into who God is. And another thing that I utilize in my writings are the ancient sacred texts that you mentioned, which I think are so important because, and I know are so important also because of out-of-body experiences I had about them, but, because I started using them because I was instructed to in an out-of-body experience. But, the ancient sacred texts are those writings which contain those keys that were left behind by other souls who had achieved, the mystical heights and out-of-body travel pinnacles, and were getting ready to ascend out of this realm. And in their words, in those ancient texts that they left behind, are the last words that give us the keys to the secret of how they ascended this realm. It's the golden key. And so those thousands and thousands of texts still exist. They're still available to us, and they're actually becoming more so because of internet, because a lot of these things were out of print. Now they're coming back in print. We have the ability to see God through all these different eyes, Do
you think that the basis of this is the problem? I'm going to say, like you said, that process of ascension, of bettering yourself, of overcoming maybe tendencies that you have. And I think, to me personally, I believe that part of the problem is people that have a deep self-hatred that never let themselves learn, overcome, maybe, like you said, their temptations or the darker side of their nature. Because you like you said, who would want to make a deal with something dark, because you're going to come out with a short end of the stick. But to me, I'm thinking, if you have a self-hatred to begin with, you really don't care.
Yeah, well, it's a combination, and that's a really good point, because, in my near-death experience that I had in 2003, Jesus told me that, the simple answer to our purpose in this realm is to go from selfishness to selflessness. And he showed me a lot about that. I was taken through a lot of these heavenly realms. It was so beautiful. So that's a big part of it, is the selfishness and becoming more selfless and thinking about others. But part of what that process includes is that we have to be willing to receive the love of God in order to have anything to give. And so if we aren't willing to allow ourselves to receive it, and I do think a lot of people have a lot of self-hatred. And, this is part of, this is an important point. I'm glad you brought it up, because we cannot give anything of ourselves. It is only the Holy Spirit and God working through us that we can give. In the revelations that were given to Saint Faustina on the Divine Mercy revelation, Jesus said to her repeatedly, mercy is the greatest attribute of God. Right. And I think that is something so important for us to really remember and talk about and repeat, because the whole point of his revelation to Saint Faustina was for us to remember that despite our human failings and despite these things that we do need to purify, God is merciful and he loves us. Right. And, in these out-of-body experiences, one of the things that happens is we touch into that unconditional love of God, because we experience it. When you go out of body, it's like the people who have near-death experiences experience that unconditional love of God and that wisdom and knowledge. You experience that in the out-of-body travel state as well. And so it helps you to bring it in. I always tell people that as you are experiencing out-of-body travel, every event, you're bringing something of heaven to earth. In every journey, you're bringing more and more and more and more. And it's so true that if we don't allow God to love us, it makes it so hard for us to then, love others. And that becomes this, one of the things you see with a lot of lost souls. And when I use this, I'm this barrier between heaven and earth that does not need to be there and should not be there. It's something that we want to overcome in this life. That's something we are meant to overcome in this life. It's part of our journey here. Yes. And it is very important that we realize, one of the things I've learned in doing a lot of spiritual counseling with a lot of different people, and also receiving a lot of emails from people all over the world, is that every single one of us is really so similar. Yes. We all have the same struggles. We all feel bad about a lot of the same things. Whatever you think that whatever reason you hold for thinking you suck is the same reason I think I suck.
Yeah, it's just yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and the same reason that most people that I talk to think that they suck.
Yes.
And we need to look at that, because we need to remember that there's a difference between humility and literally self-destruction.
Yes. Yeah, that people disguise it as humility.
Right. And so, humility is an excellent virtue that will help us to purify and move through this life and make progress. But it has to be the proper humility, which is, I can do nothing without God, but through God I can do everything. And therefore you're literally this barrier, you're like pushing it away, and you're opening up this energy force that allows everything to change. And that's what happens when you start having the out-of-body travel experiences, is that this energy is completely altered. We become, and that energy, as it starts moving through you and through your life, it changes the very molecular structure of your spirit, your soul, and even your body. Even my, I shouldn't be alive, but I am, and I'm, it's a miraculous healing that I had, and many people have experienced that sort of thing, and that's, that's a God thing, and it's also, grateful to the doctors who participated in that, Yes. But we have to recognize that self-hatred does not serve us or God either. Right. Humility serves us and it serves God in the sense that we become teachable by being humble. The problem with pride is that we end up, we can't be taught anymore,
Right. Like, yeah. And I personally think also sometimes that people, to learn is a process. In other words, you don't walk into school and walk out the next day and you have all this knowledge, which means in that process that you described, you're going to fail and you need to try again. And some things come easier than others, but I think sometimes people, they kind of either too hard on themselves or unforgiving of themselves to say, well, I made that mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to try not to do that again. But they never get beyond that. In other words, the lesson is lost on them, and they want to not, how can I say, not practice at it. How's that?
Yeah.
It's too hard.
That's an important point, because it does take, the two books I recommend for people on my site when they're just starting out is Come to Wisdom's Door and The Mysteries of the Redemption. Mm-hmm. And The Mysteries of the Redemption lays out this path, which is an ancient monastic path, which covers many, Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Islamic Sufi paths, and all these other paths, but it involves purification, discrimination, and discipline. And so, yes, these processes, we do have to undergo a disciplining of our hearts and our minds. Yes. And so we do have to do the work, so to speak.
Yes, exactly.
And, as we're purifying, we're recognizing things within us that need to be altered. Discrimination is when we actually start learning more about the energetic truth, and we're able to then make the discernments necessary. And discipline then is the part of the path where we start doing the work of really disciplining to make those changes. Whatever it is that we make the mistake on, we need to practice the opposite virtue. It's not that difficult, let's say if you got lust, then you're going to practice purity, which is the opposite virtue. If you're dealing with greed, you're trying to do moderation. So you can, my book, The Mysteries of the Redemption, the beginning one, will talk a lot about the issue of the virtues and the vices and how you start with that disciplinary process. And of course, they all go through lots of different things.
Do you think that, and the reason why I brought that up is that we all have our personal challenges, as in some things come easier for you versus,
Yes.
And you sometimes people, I hate to do it, they compare themselves and they look at some other person and go, why can't I overcome this? And that person seems to not have a problem with it. But it's kind of an individual thing. And it's, maybe because this is the one area where you need to work it out more, you just have a weakness in this area. And sometimes people, I think sometimes do too much of that comparison to who's around them. Not realizing that everybody's on their own path, their own process, in other words.
Right, and I totally agree with that assessment, because comparing is pointless.
Yes.
Because of the fact, some other books that I'd highly recommend to people who are struggling with exactly what you're talking about, it would be, there was a mystic, Francisco Candido Javier, 1910 to 2002, very prolific, and he wrote a series that starts with a book called Na Solar, but there's 12 books in the series. He talks about the nature of what's happening in the reincarnation process and how we are forming our lifetimes based on what we need to overcome. And it's very helpful because this is important when we compare, because the whole point of it is understanding, each of us has a certain configuration here. And so whatever our weaknesses are here, it's okay that there are other people that have already overcome them.
Yes.
We are here to take care of whatever our configuration is.
Yes.
And the success of our personal journey, this incarnation, is completely dependent upon those personal things that we're set out upon before this incarnation. And so, to compare yourself to someone who's doing something entirely different, if you were doing what they're doing, it would be considered a failure at the end of your life because you didn't focus on the things you actually needed to actually accomplish, because these are energetic adjustments that occur. We make an energetic shift as we overcome things in our personality or our vice structures. It changes us energetically, and that is a shift, and it's important. And so those are what our successes are. Also, another book that I recommend to a lot of people, some people love it, some people think they have trouble understanding it, but it's called The Spiritual Life. It's a treatise on ascetical and mystical theology by Father Adolf Tanqueray. And mystical theology is the study of the purification of the soul, and Father Tanqueray wrote this masterpiece which literally helps us to go through this process of deep self-examination where we can overcome and look through. It's a very powerful process, and this is the way that we can look at what we personally need to do in this incarnation. Comparison is pointless, and the reality is that most of us, when we actually compared our basic elements, like I said earlier, we struggle with a lot of the same things. There might be someone who might have more money or be more successful in one way or another. But most people struggle with lust. Most people struggle with different types of moderation in their lives, figuring out what exactly they feel that God has called them to do in this life. There's a lot of similarities in our paths, and most people struggle with their relationships with the people who are close to them, with their spouses.
Yes, everybody has their weak point, for lack of a better word.
And so, we are really much more similar than we are different. So if you're going to compare, I would compare on that point, and then you'd find that our struggles, we are so much more alike than we are. And, the reality is that those comparisons don't have any meaning because of the fact that what someone else is doing could be completely a pointless venture for your soul. Right. And so you want to remember that, and it doesn't diminish that it might be absolutely what this other soul needs to be doing for theirs at this point in time. And so it doesn't diminish that for what their journey is, but your journey is not diminished by, if you have a very simple journey and, you feel like someone else has like some grand journey, that doesn't diminish the importance of that journey.
Right.
Most of us take a lot of different types of paths during our lifetimes. We're all going to be doing great things in certain lifetimes, and we're all going to live lifetimes where we intentionally live a very quiet life, sometimes, intentionally very simple, and everything in between. We're all going to do those things.
Right.
What's important is that we are consciously present for what we are doing right now,
right.
And then what you're also going to experience, like in the out-of-body experiences, you start this fairly early on as well, is you do start traveling into past and or future or parallel lives. Mm-hmm. And you start seeing some of these things, because part of what happens, you go into the rites of passage, the initiations into the mysteries, and there is a period where there is a coming together of the knowledge of all these lifetimes, the personalities. So you do start seeing, and you start seeing the patterns of behavior that you might start recognizing, oh, this is what I keep doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're like, okay, well, I handled it this way this time, I handled it this way that time, so these things didn't work, I need to think of something else. But then you're also going to see that you've had lifetimes where you might have done some pretty intense things. You've done, had a lot of lifetimes where you're just like living on the frontier and got murdered by some bears and lions, and
Right, yes, yes.
A lot of us have had a lot of short lifetimes because we've had a lot of frontiers all around the world.
Yes.
And we've had a lot of those kinds of things. I remember going back to a time when I was a young boy standing with my father facing a mastodon.
Okay.
And so we have these lifetimes that you'll see that you will have experienced many things. I remember experiencing lifetimes where I was profoundly handicapped. I remember lifetimes where I was a warrior. I remember lifetimes where I was a courtesan.
Right.
Both male and female, different things. And so what these things do is they provide us with perspective. They give us the ability to understand and have compassion and insight, wisdom into human experience, which then becomes the experience of all life. And this then makes us better servants of God, as we are called to assist when we are dealing with souls who are in the purgatories or the hells and they need assistance, or souls who are lost souls, wandering spirits, or otherwise, and of course, I also deal with, the spiritual warfare. So dealing with that too.
Let me ask you something, Marilynn. Because I see a lot of people that, now that they're coming around and thinking of extraterrestrials, some people are actually coming around. It's not like, some, cuckoo, etc. And I think a lot of people sometimes are thinking, okay, wait a minute. Sometimes I'm having a hard enough time trying to straighten out being just a human being in the context of, that we've always thought of ourselves as the center of the universe, and it's our spirituality and God. And now you're going to pull in extraterrestrial beings from another planet. They kind of like, okay, this is getting too crazy. What do you feel is the answer as far as our experiences as human beings, within, let's say, I'm going to say planet Earth, because this is this is where we exist on, whether it's through the process of reincarnation or whatever. How does that impact us? Or is that always been part of, we just don't recognize it, part of life, outside of just what we know of as planet Earth and our existence?
Well, I can tell you that, when I go to the galactic heavens, there are extraterrestrials in heaven.
Okay.
So we know that they're there, and when you're there, it feels very natural to the point where you don't even notice them. You only realize it when you come back. You're like, wait, there were extraterrestrials in heaven.
Okay.
So we know that, and I've had many, many extraterrestrial experiences. In the Mystic Knowledge series, there's a book on extraterrestrials in particular. You can read about that, and there's a lot of I've had a lot of extraterrestrial experiences. The purpose of our human existence here on Earth, we are a third and fourth dimensional realm, and what that is, it's a mortal realm, which is a world wherein the battles between good and evil take place. So that means we're actually a purgatorial realm.
Okay.
A purification realm. There are an infinite number of purgatorial realms. So, as we go through that journey, we don't necessarily have to just reincarnate here. We will also travel through other worlds that serve purposes for that. Right. But here, when we're coming here, we are trying to instigate an alteration in something that we have not resolved, something that has not received resolution. It's often misunderstanding about eternal love, about eternal existence, about eternalness, God himself. It's a misunderstanding that continues between groupings of souls where we're trying to get some type of resolution between some things that keep happening between them. And a lot of this just really has to do with literally people getting along with one another, and a lot of these things where we learn to treat one another with love.
Yes.
We learn to treat ourselves as well
Yes.
with love.
Yes.
But that we become capable of giving and receiving love as God would have us do, where we, Mother Teresa was a good example of, someone who kind of just entered the realm in almost like a state where, she just decided, I'm going to try to live this life in a different kind of way. Her mother would say that she was just as precocious as any child. She was just, did all kinds of normal things that everyone else did. But then she made a choice, and then she was, she had a mystical experience on a train where she was given her mission, and she just went for it.
Right.
She was solid, despite the fact that we find out later after her death that she experienced a lot of dark nights of the soul.
Yes.
She was steady in the vision of selflessness, giving her soul over to selflessness.
Right.
And going back to what I was told by Jesus was selfishness to selflessness, is that we have to alter our vision that way. And that's an energetic shift. In my near-death experience, it was shown to me as like levels on a board, where we had to get to a place where we could really set ourselves aside for the greater good of others. And this becomes difficult because we know that this is where we also have the conflict of how we have to deal with trying to do that individually while other people are doing whatever it is that they're going to do. And that's where a lot of the challenges come in. And so, one of the things I often tell people is that we learn very quickly in out-of-body experiences that God is love. People say that and they throw it around.
Right.
But God is, when you experience God in the out-of-body travel state, He is the energy of love. And so what we can know from this is that we can make decisions based on that knowledge of, okay, well, so if I want to try to do things as I hope or believe, I'm trying to discern what God would do. I know that God is the energy of love. So I have to do it from this energy that I experience and feel and see in these out-of-body experiences. And for those, for those who haven't had them, you can learn even more. You can learn about them even by reading what other people have experienced. Sure. You can learn about these things by reading my books and other people's books or whatever. But you can, read in the Mysteries of the Redemption, see the things that I've seen, and I try to convey them. And then that kind of becomes a part of your experience too. And so then we are altering ourselves as we take that in to become more able to make decisions and choose our actions based on a different concept of wanting to move forward as that love, that energy of what love is. Not just this silly notion of everything is love, all that. Not just that silly notion that it's this energy, and this is what fuels the universe. And that's a much thing the word love can contain. But we do our best with words,
Exactly. I think that a lot of times people, when I tell people, it's like there's, everywhere you go, there you are. And I think there's something on a soul level that you understand, like you said, about maybe what you're trying to accomplish or overcome. And it's something that it's an agreement without fear of punishment. In other words, it's not because I'm doing this or trying to overcome it because I'm afraid. Because anything that's based on fear or punishment, not a good thing. It's almost like something that I'm going to do regardless of reward or punishment, because I know on a soul level, this is what I need to grapple with. Like you said, everybody's got their own script that they, like you said, they keep stumbling over that same rock. And the reason why I say this is that sometimes I see people like they're trying to put like this fear, a fear of hell, fear of this, fear of that, or disapproval. And I personally don't think that God looks at us in a disapproving tone. I think we do that ourselves when we're not caught up with our ego, that we recognize, what do I need to do? Or what are my shortcomings that I need to work out? But it's not, I don't think it's a question of that, that God that shakes his finger at you and, punishment or anything like that. I really don't think that that's the way it works.
Compatibility thing than punishment. And that's what people don't realize is, we go where we're compatible after death, just like we create what we're compatible to oftentimes while we're alive, sort of. You know what I mean? Because that's a whole nother discussion, but because it's not like, I'm not saying that as an absolute, but that's what happens after death for sure, is we go where we're compatible, we become what we truly are. One of the processes that really helps us with this is, as like I was talking about, the Spiritual Life by Father Adolf Tanqueray. It's the study of things like mystical theology, which actually help us to learn to discern within our own soul what is goodness, what is holiness, and it helps us to bring that in. Those are the kinds of things that help us to actually bring in that altruistic spirit. One of the things that psychology teaches, and it's very true, and this is very important as well, and is that part of the reason people often feel bad about themselves is when people feel bad about themselves when they don't feel like they've done the right thing, or when they don't feel good about what they're doing, or they don't, when we make a decision and we make the decision based on, truly trying to do what is best for everyone with the best of what we can, we usually feel okay about it. Yeah. Even if everyone's mad or, angry about, because we know that we did do it that way. If we do something and we're like, gosh, it would probably be better if I did this, but I really would rather just do this, then we might feel bad about ourselves more. And that is a process that's psychological that makes us feel worse about ourselves. And we can think about that. And there's a reason why that happens. And part of that is because when we are doing things that are not pushing our soul towards the good, we are pushing ourselves towards the opposite. And of course, that makes us feel bad because we are going backwards. And we're not here to go backwards. So it makes us feel bad when we do things that push us backwards. So every time we do something, anytime it's a little thing, any little thing that pushes us forward, if it's something as simple as smiling at somebody, if it's something as simple as calling your mother and being kind to her, or if it's something as simple as, gee, I'm going to do this really nice thing for my kids, even though I don't feel like it today, because I know it's really or whatever, you make decisions and you take into consideration this greater good. And when you're doing that, the more you're doing this, and if you are literally feeding your soul with mystical theology, people have trouble bringing this in. They read it and they're like, it's so complicated. I don't really, but what it does is it changes the way that we think, and it helps us to actually look at ourselves more honestly and bring in, because again, God's over here. He's the all-holy God. We want him. So we have to understand what that means to be the all-holy God. So we, this mystical theology, it's not about, oh, you suck. No, it's about, I want to understand how I can better move towards God and stop doing things that push me away from God.
Right.
And,
exactly.
And when we're doing things that push us away from God, we always feel crappy. And
Yeah.
whether it's ourselves or just crappy in general, we do feel crappy. And that's going to continue. And that's part of why we have to have, St. Padre Pio, who was a mystic and a stigmatist in the 20th century, he was a huge proponent of the importance of daily spiritual reading. And this was part of it because he said, we have to feed our soul.
Yes.
And so that spiritual reading is important. Even, if you're looking at doing some, there's a lot of options too on mystical theology. And I'm trying to put up an Amazon page with all my favorite mystical theology books. So I'll try to get that out there and people can look on my social media. I'll get it when I get it there. Yeah, because there's, especially with some of these publishers, they're putting out things that have been out of print. And, there's a lot of things that haven't been available that are just masterpieces. Another book that's really good for this that I wrote is called The Shining Ocean. It's in the How-To series. We have a series of 9 books that starts with Come to Wisdom's Door, that goes in progression through the how-to processes, and every book takes you it goes into a different mystery of the process. The Shining Ocean goes into a lot of this mystical theology, which is this self-examination and understanding the actual purification processes that must take place as you're entering into these sacred mystical spheres, and understanding all the little nuances within it. These are just very important, not just for that journey, but it's what gives us contentment as human beings.
Yes, and contentment is very important.
And that contentment it's an indication to us when we're able to be at peace. It's an indication that we are touching into the purpose of our existence here. And we feel contentment when we know we're moving in that correct direction, and we feel discontent when we're moving away from it. Yeah. And that is a real good gauge for any of us, that when we start feeling discontent, to take a look at our life and say, okay, what did I change that might be pushing me away from God? Because when we are moving towards God, we usually feel content. Now, there are, obviously dark nights and things like that, which are part of that. But besides that, and, that's a whole nother subject too, but, we generally, when we make decisions and when we start doing that work, that discipline period, where we do the work of literally fine-tuning our soul and we're moving forward, we're going to feel much more okay. Doesn't mean we don't have, this core feeling of, but, that core feeling is something we can still work with. And I think it's important that all of us as human beings try harder to help one another with that. Because we all have it, I think. This is one thing I think I see as being so universal. I think everyone has it. If someone doesn't have it, I'd like to know about it, because everyone I think everyone's got it. And so I think it's real important that we start helping each other with it rather than actually pushing each other further into it. And that is part and parcel also of changing the motion, the motion that's going backward, of pushing someone, because it makes us feel better. That shouldn't make us feel better. What should make us feel better is to uplift each other.
Of course. Of course. You want everybody to feel. If you're feeling good, you want others to feel like you do. In other words, experience spiritual tranquility, because you feel I'm doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's very important.
We need to be doing for one another, and that's all part and parcel. And we want to look at it as motion, because you can see, like with what I'm doing with my hands here, this is the way motion you see in the universe, and we want to be moving forward. We don't want to go backwards.
Of course.
But karmic is something that goes around like a circle. And there's several purgatorial realms that are called chaos realms, and they all have different characteristics, but they all have this circling. Okay. And this is something that we see a lot of on in the earth as well, where a lot of people will circle. They get caught up on the ground with materialistic concerns and things like this, and they circle. And if you're just circling, you don't move forward.
Of course,
you
right, exactly.
Break that momentum. You got to break the momentum of that circle, and you got to move. You got to stop that circle.
You're stagnant, is what you're saying.
Yes.
You're stuck.
Yes.
It might feel like you're doing something because you are in motion, but within that motion, you're not going anywhere. So it's kind of deceptive in a way.
That's part of the whole trigger behind the chaos realms and behind chaos in general. Is it's a way to make you feel like you're accomplishing something when you're just doing mindless and pointless activity.
Right.
And that's what it is, and that's what you have to identify: mindless and pointless activity versus purposeful work.
Yes.
For the progress of your soul. And so, you actually might be better off, like if you're typically doing this, you'd be better off to literally just stop, sit on your couch, and feel like you're doing absolutely nothing.
Yes.
And actually think about it.
Examine it, yeah.
Okay, let's not go to the mall today. I want to figure out how I can start making purposeful motion forward rather than pointless activity.
Yes, and I totally agree with that.
One of the biggest things with physical material life is distraction.
Absolutely, yes. People do that a lot. Some to their detriment. I mean, sometimes it's very, it's people do it if they're experiencing, like you said, a momentary, problem, and they'll distract themselves. But other people fall into that pattern where they're wanting to distract all the time. Distraction
is one of the most common things that you will see when souls are crossing over. It's one of the most common impediments in souls crossing into the afterlife is distraction. Because what happens when people will actually use distraction to the point where they accomplish nothing in this life. Literally, they will get through the whole life and they will have done nothing for their soul.
Right.
And they don't realize that until the moment of death. And then at the point of death, they're so used to pointless activity and distraction, they have to learn a whole new way of operating in order to even become capable of moving forward in the afterlife. It's one of the most common things I see because the chaos realms are very full.
Yeah, and I mean, I know people can distract, but I think especially now in modern times where there are so many ways to get distracted.
Oh yeah, with all the electronics for sure, it's hard to create the silence that is necessary to keep the ability to communicate with God open, and the spirit world, and with, just keeping the flow from all the realms to the realm that we live in.
And people sometimes, they've said it, for some people to shut off everything, even just to stay still, that's like you're asking them, like, what do you mean? It's like, yes, turn everything off and try sitting there for a little bit and not do anything. It's very difficult for a lot of people, by the way. Very difficult.
Yes. And a lot of, and even just to turn everything off and pull out some type of spiritual reading, and I have a lot of recommendations on my website, and I've made some really good recommendations here that would really help you to refocus on the work of the soul, which is, this is something that a lot of people just don't really give enough thought to, which is, we are here for a very short period of time. It seems like it's long. We behave as if it's permanent. We know it's not. And we are here to achieve very particular goals, spiritual goals. So if you are not pursuing that, you're not going to achieve them. And you're going to waste another lifetime. And you need to realize that people do waste a lot of lifetimes.
Yes.
And that is not a desirable thing to do. We want to start getting people out of the circular motion into the continuum of knowledge and moving forward. because that's what is necessary, not just for us individually, it's also necessary for us as humanity.
Yes.
A lot of the things that we're seeing worldwide are happening because people are getting further and further away from that continuum of the
Yes.
spirit, continuum of knowledge, and people are getting so distracted they cannot see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to do that in order to create a greater civilization where people are operating. You know, if we don't even do the work on a personal level of the purification and the understanding of the discernment, the process of discernment is a job that we have to be willing to do and take on personally. If we don't do it personally, how can we as a society ever agree to what is correct, what is the right way to approach something, what is the most likely to be life-giving and fruit-bearing for all, rather than something that's going to continue to de-energize and de-energize and de-energize and de-energize. Right. You see all this fighting, you see all these shootings, you see all this war. This is the result of disconnected souls that are doing this and doing this.
Exactly.
And we have to be getting people to stop that and start doing this. And once we get people to connect and reconnect back into the source of all knowledge, then things are going to start making sense again for people. But it does require some work. It requires this discipline of being willing to put in some of the effort. And you know, this is a real easy ploy of the dark side. There's a lot of simple ploys of the dark side that have been very successful that I think are important for people to realize. You know, one is the fact that a lot of people don't believe that the dark side even exists.
Yeah, I agree.
That's one of the easiest things that they pulled off, because if the dark side doesn't exist, then everything goes. That's why people think they can worship Baphomet and there not be any bad consequences after death.
Right.
And then another one is that you can just be completely worldly, completely scattered, completely distracted, and that things of the spirit, things of God are unimportant and irrelevant. And here we are. I think it's important we take a moment to realize that here we are, mortal beings. We know this life is impermanent, and yet we do that.
Yes. Oh,
so,
yes.
And so that's illogical, right, in and of itself. But yeah, that is a real simple ploy of, okay, let's throw more devices, let them all get addicted to all sorts of technology and stuff, and then, you know, then they'll never, get back into prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, or even the silence. You know, I mentioned this in another interview that there has been some scientific studies recently showing that the human brain really needs to have silence to actually be able to recover and heal. And we also know that the attention span of human beings is going down every year based on electronics and devices.
Yes.
And the attention span is a really important thing for us as human beings in order to maintain our ability to continue to commune with the divine. We don't want to cut ourselves off completely. If we do, we're just literally going to be going backwards. And we're already seeing that happen on a pretty massive scale.
Yes, yes. And it's becoming apparent because, like you said, because of these technologies, you're aware of it more often before, where communication was much more limited. Now it's very in your face. It's and it has its upside. It serves a good purpose, but not when it takes over everything and all of our attention and all of our emotion, because I think that's another thing. It eats up our emotions.
Yes.
And it leaves us spent.
Yes.
And the human to human thing starts going away.
Yes.
And that I think that causes a big problem for us as human beings, the way we're made up emotionally and physically and spiritually, altogether, the component. We suffer for it tremendously.
Yeah, and you do end up with these bite-sized relationships.
Yes.
Very superficial relationships, which are not truly fruit-bearing generally, and generally are not something, we need the fruits. The fruits of the Spirit are necessary, And so by cutting all of those, you can see if you just look at that, cut out the fruits, cut out the meaningful relationships, cut out people's ability to concentrate and focus, cut out the ability of people to reside in the silence. You can see how easily these are ploys of the dark side to cut us off from the divine life itself.
Yes, it is. It is.
And
it causes, and it's very, I want to say, it's very deceptive in the way it works.
Yes.
Because it feels good. How's that?
Well,
it's like,
okay, because it takes more effort. It's more work. I relate to this too because I have to discipline myself.
Right.
I don't, it's not like I don't struggle with it either. I'm like,
right.
Gosh, it'd be more fun to just go do that. I don't want to do this right now.
Sure, of course.
But,
we all have to, like, it's not like you wake up and, it's like, of course, we're human beings. That's the human condition where, you want to slide into what is it? The easiest thing. So yeah, of course, that's something that I think happens to everybody. But anyway, Marilynn, I wanted to thank you so much for spending this time today. It has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Okay, because you have so many areas of interest and something that I think is critical to us as human beings, individually and as a whole, which is our souls. The one thing that is immortal about us.
Yes. And, your listeners, feel free to go to our website. It's at outofbodytravel.org.
Okay.
You can download any of our books under Out of Body Books, the tab. We also have a course of study that's totally free as well.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and it takes you through a whole rigorous, you take it at your own time and whatever works for you, and you can do it however works for you. And also I do spiritual counseling, which you can check out on the site.
Yes. But, I will have a link to your website on the credits of the show as well. I mean, besides our podcast listeners that heard it, but anybody can go, and also there's a hyperlink that will take them to your website.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's been great. Thank you so much, Marlene. It's fun talking to you.
Absolutely, darling. Take care. Bye-bye. Good luck to you.
You too. Bye-bye. You too.
Okay. She is great. She's great. Let me tell you something. She has so much information that I'm telling you, we only skimmed the top of the pool of information that Marilynn has studied. Not only studied, but is an expert in a lot of spiritual stuff. And I'm going to say this is not pertaining per se to any religion. It's not that, it's this religion or that religion. It's, to me personally, I think spirituality transcends the identification, I hate to say it in some cases, the division caused by certain religions. And by this I mean, if you want to belong to a certain religion or religious tradition, I think that's fine, because I think certain things resonate differently with a certain person. I just have a problem when there's exclusion or division. That's when I think that is that works against the whole idea of spirituality and growing spiritually. Because I think ultimately all roads, that all roads leads to Rome, all roads lead to the divine. And for different reasons, circumstances, maybe the religion you were born into, let's say your family of origin, or something that you participate in as an adult. Everybody's different, but that's what I'm saying. It's not like one size fit all. But that thing about one is better than the other, I don't go with that. And everybody's at a different pace, a different level. And one thing I wanted to say, and I think it's really important, is that a lot of times when people look at holiness, I'm going to say holiness, you always think of people that were extraordinary. Maybe they were very pious. Some of them were even what's called martyrs. In other words, and so people kind of think, well, that's for like certain very special persons that either because early on in their lives they had a revelation, or sometimes because something happened to them and they enter into the state of pursuing holiness 24/7. And there's people like that. She gave a modern example with Mother Teresa, who became a nun very young, and she went off to India and she worked. She was most well known for, of course, her work in the slums of India, and that she was there basically her whole life. And I think that there is something that we can all pursue on as regular people. When I say regular people, I mean on a day-to-day basis. I think holiness, I don't want to take away from the grandeur of the word because of the way we think of it in the context that we've been taught. But I think as regular human beings with all our faults, all our misgivings, we are holy, even in small steps. The one good thing that we do maybe in a day, stuff that maybe nobody's there to witness, when you do the right thing, when you help somebody, and it's not because you're going to get praised for it, or you've got somebody that's going to say, oh my God, you're so nice, wow, you did that. No, I'm talking about when there is no witness, nobody that's going to pat you on the back and say, oh, good job, or oh, you're such a good, or or you're, no, there will be nobody there to say one way or the other. Okay, I personally think that those are the moments when you are the most holy, the most spiritual. I think that those are the steps where your soul grows, and the rest of your day might be filled with sometimes doing the wrong thing, or like she said, being distracted, or putting off stuff that you need to do. Because, and I've said this before, God, we are overwhelmed with things of the what's called multitasking. I find that sometimes I wake up at 2-3 in the morning. It's happened to me, and I'm doing a to-do list in my head. And it's like, what are you doing? Okay, like, and then it's like, I gotta stop this. I gotta turn this off. Because obviously physically, believe me, I understand how bad that is for you. But in other words, this, like she said, that wheel within chaos that you're going around, it's very deceptive because it makes you think you're accomplishing stuff. I'm doing stuff. And I understand that there's a lot of things that we need to do, let's say, in our lives, which is the moment we're living right now, where you have to do this. You have to go to work. You have children, you have to pick them up, you have to take them to do this, you have to do that. You're preparing, let's say like right now, school just started, and you maybe haven't, and there's even people now, I've seen it, God knows, commercially, we're being heard in that direction, which are already looking at the holiday season now, the last few months of the year, where even commercially, they kind of like cracking that little whip on our butts going, look, we're putting out the autumn fall stuff and the Halloween stuff and the Thanksgiving stuff and the Christmas stuff. And so people are like, okay, and well, my God, Christmas and So I know that a lot of times it takes a lot of effort on an individual basis to pull back and say, wait a minute, stop. Yes, all those things, whatever my to-do list is, that I need to take care of my family, myself, my obligations, if I have a job. I'm not diminishing the importance of that, but that you have to say, I have to stop this a minute and give myself a moment of solitude. How's that? And a lot of people go, solitude? And I'm thinking, yeah, solitude. There's nothing wrong with solitude. And when I mean solitude, I don't mean solitude as in, I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to be on my phone. Ooh, that's not solitude. I'm talking about solitude as in, I'm going to be by myself. I'm not going to watch TV. I'm not going to be on the computer. maybe if you want, you can play some soft music. And even then, you have to be careful. Sometimes I wonder what the music people, submit themselves to. But okay, but let's say no music. Will you just sit there and just like let your mind wander a little bit, like let it empty out, and empty yourself out of that need. I need to. Well, oh my God, sit down here. But I've got this and this and this and this and this too. Yes, we need to do that. We need to. I think that if most people did that, even the busiest 10, 15 minutes, okay, just sit there. And people say, well, I can't ever do that. You know what? I've had 3 children. Well, I still have 3 children. But, I mean, I've gone through, because a lot of people will say, I've worked full time. I've gone to school. I mean, I've done it all. I mean, as far as most human beings have had that experience. And I know that if you can't do it at home, you can even sit in your car and just stop and just sit there and fight the need to look and do something because you think you're losing out on precious time. And that's, I think, how it starts, that you start allowing yourself that moment of introspection and that ability to communicate or listen to your soul. Or what's really going on in your head, and it's like a process. And she's like she says, and then you start having this communion with yourself internally. That's not all about what's out here. And I think that once you get that dynamic going, then you start moving beyond that, what she calls that circular motion, where it feels like you're going somewhere because you're really busy and doing a lot of stuff all the time, but in reality, all you're doing is like a hamster wheel kind of deal. Yeah, the hamster's not going absolutely nowhere. It thinks it is, but it's not going anywhere. Because what's going to happen is once you start doing this, it pulls you out of that belief that you're doing something when in reality you're not. Or that these things that seem like they're so important, either they're not important or they're important but not as important as you think. Which, by the way, also pulls back on that pressure that we all get. Like, I got to do this, and I got to finish, and the deadline, and people that it's like, okay, wait, that which, by the way, I highly recommend that we all limit ourselves to what we can do within 24 hours that day. Because when we start getting ahead of ourselves, we drive ourselves crazy. And getting back to originally what I was saying, that a lot of people think of holiness as being something for saints or for ascetics or somebody that's going to sit on the mountain, wearing a loincloth. And I think that the state of holiness is achieved by regular people, maybe in moments. It could just be a moment of holiness. So that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to take the word holiness out of the context of what we always think of as holy. Or that it's a person that's in a religious order, that's in a monastery or in a convent or some place where there's continuous prayer. Which, by the way, that's great. But, a lot of times when people would go to convents and monasteries or, these, is because, of course, you're being pulled away from regular life because it's really hard to be devoted when you've got your little kids running around under you asking you, Mommy, and I need to go to the bathroom. It's because sometimes that is the challenge, to do it within the scope of engaging in messy life, creation, and still be able to strive towards those moments of holiness and communion with our spirit and thereby with the divine. And it's not just something that pertains to a holy person. It's, in other words, we are all holy people that we just have to be aware and try not to be sucked into this vacuum of distraction, which, by the way, I'm glad you pointed that out, because God knows that we're inundated with a gazillion million ways of distracting ourselves. And don't get me wrong, there are times when distraction is exactly what we need. And let me explain. Sometimes we have a big problem, or let's say we have a bad day at work. You know that saying that they say how women, when the going gets tough to tough, go shopping. Sometimes we do need that, because I'm going to say it as a woman. You go shopping for a bit, and you get, and you distract yourself for a little bit, maybe, looking at this and looking at that, or, some clothing, and all of a sudden it just pulls you away from maybe a problem that you've got, or maybe a bad day. Or even when people go to the movies, that distraction is okay, because it kind of allows you not to telescope on a big problem. And then when you come back from that distraction, you realize, man, you know what? I was getting carried away. This is bad, but not as bad as I thought. Or, you know what? Maybe I'm thinking this is what I want. It's not what I want. Or that worst case scenario, I look at it and it's like pretty bad, but I can handle it. Or I think of alternatives. It kind of allows you that couple of hours of distraction. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. I remember when my grandmother, she used to love fishing. As a matter of fact, she's the one that made a fisherwoman out of me. And I had broken up with a boyfriend. And it was a pretty serious, relationship. I want to say I was like 19, 20, something like that. It was a midday thing, and she was at home all the time. She had bad arthritis on her legs and everything. And I went over to her house and I told her. And I said, she goes, well, you want to go fishing? I was like, okay. And I went out there, I took her fishing, and we both fished. And you know what? I spent like 4 or 5 hours out there. There's places out here in Miami where you can fish out the bridges, and she loved it. I loved it. And you know what it did for me? That 4 or 5 hours of distraction, it made me not feel as bad, and really gave me almost a way of looking at what happened, as in, is it really as bad as you think? Or is there something in it that really you wanted? Yeah, it just allowed me a different perspective. Because when we're all intense and caught up in the moment, we see things way out of proportion. And then I guess my point being that sometimes distractions, when they're in that context, serve a purpose. However, when you're continuously distracted, all the time distracted, and you jump from one distraction to the other, it's very deceptive, because you think you're doing something, and it feels great, but it doesn't allow you to figure out things that need to be resolved, or that you say, I need to work at that, even if it's little by little. I just can't pretend it doesn't exist. Okay? And that's another thing. Sometimes people see a problem and they're like, it's gigantic, it's enormous, so I'm just going to put it away and not look at it. Instead of saying, well, you know what? I'm going to do a little bit every day. My 24-hour suggestion. What can I do today? A little bit. And then a little bit. And then a little bit. And you break it down. And then it becomes more, yay, man, I got this done. Wow, okay, this is not as bad as I thought. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit here and a little bit there. And you don't allow the distraction, whether it's stuff that's intruded upon you, or you seek out, and you basically navigate the waters of modern life, because this is where we're all living right now. I think, each time period has its own challenges, and we're talking the 21st century with the advantages and disadvantages of technology. And, we're faced with things that people 100 years ago, or even let's say 70 years ago, didn't have to worry about. And vice versa. They had diseases, there was polio and tuberculosis and the Spanish influenza, that now we don't have to worry about those diseases. Okay. There's a lot of things that people back then died from, and we don't think twice about it because it's not a threat anymore. But, there is some things that now with our technology they didn't have to worry about. A lot of it, I personally think, is time. Time seemed to be more available. And it was okay, by the way. It was okay to want time, to have time, to use time, to slowed down. You weren't thought of as, like with phones. And I'm sure everybody's experienced it. People call you, hey, why didn't you pick up the phone? Because I was in the bathroom. I don't know. I was outside. It happens to me. I'll leave my phone here. And I'm outside working with my animals. I don't take my phone out there because sometimes I don't even have a pocket. And after a while, my family knows that if I'm not answering the phone because probably my phone is not with me. And just leave me a message or text me and I'll get back to you. But how many of you, I'm sure most of you, find yourselves in that predicament where you're expected to be instantly available all the time? And maybe people 100 years ago, they didn't have to worry about that. Nobody expected you to be like there all the time. You don't think that has a built-in pressure? I beg to differ. It sure does. And even now in countries that are less developed, you walk around. You look at all these documentaries, and you've got people out in the bush, and they've got a phone. It's everywhere. And so it serves a purpose, of course, in an emergency. But at the same time, I think it robs us of time. So anyway, guys, I hope you like the show. I love speaking to Marilynn. I'm hoping to bring her back and maybe we can discuss some of the other topics, which she's got a gazillion million of. And I urge you to visit her website, which is outofbodytravel.org. I'll have a link to it in the credits of the show. And like she said, her books can be downloaded for free, Free. So don't miss out on that chance. And again, I want to thank you all for being part of my audience. I've got fantastic guests coming on, and I want to thank you for spending this time with me. Take care.